The story begins with a lecture given by our protagonist, who will become a very famous scientist after inventing a comprehensive AI system capable of performing most repetitive tasks humans do. Our hero, Dao, explains to the audience that this system will allow humans to focus only on important matters, such as industry and medicine, since AI still cannot innovate on its own. After the lecture, journalists gathered around and asked if this system would increase unemployment. Dao replied that the system would create more jobs, especially in the field of AI itself. He assured them that the system was still in the experimental stage, but guaranteed complete user privacy protection. Afterwards, he bid farewell to everyone, saying he would return to his lab and ask them to await the latest news on the system's development. But at that moment, before he could finish speaking, he was struck by a sniper's bullet. Unfortunately, the bullet hit his heart with high precision, causing him to fall dead before everyone's eyes. People quickly called the police and ambulance, and despite some attempts to provide first aid, Dao was dying and said the wound was untreatable. As he closed his eyes and thought this was the end, he began to hear a voice saying his body had been reconstituted in another form. Dao felt regret for spending his entire life working and wished he had lived more freely. But his thoughts were interrupted by the system's voice informing him that data transfer was complete and that he had gained the knowledge skill, considered a unique ability. Dao was puzzled by the voice speaking to him and tried to ask who it was, but received no response, which saddened him. Then he started feeling water droplets falling on him from above, not understanding how this was happening since he was supposed to be dead. He tried to think more and said he might be in a hospital or something, but strangely, his lower body was very cold, and he didn't understand why. He tried to move quickly to figure out what was happening to him, but he fell to the ground unsteadily, realizing within seconds, to his shock, that he had transformed into a giant white carrot, or as we'll call it, a giant carrot. Dao felt mixed emotions of joy at getting a second chance at life and sadness, because this chance was in the form of a carrot that anyone could consume. As a scientist, he decided to judge the situation later when he understood the carrot's place in the food chain. He noticed an AI system window appear in front of him, and this was the same voice that spoke to him after his death. The system asked him to give it a name, so he named it Comprehensive System, as he couldn't complete this system in his previous life. At that moment, Dao saw the system start to shine with such intense brightness that he couldn't keep his eyes open. He tried to resist until the system was fully set up a few moments later. The system began providing Dao with information about anything he wanted to know. Dao was extremely happy and named the system Xuan, treating it as a friend. He asked the system for information about his current identity and his rank in the food chain, only to find out he was just a useless carrot, one of the weakest beings among demonic sects, and that he had no specific gender. Despite his sadness, Dao gathered his strength and asked the system if there were tasks he could perform, like in games. The system replied that he should live his life as he wished. Nevertheless, Dao decided to plan for his future. But his thoughts were interrupted when he collided with something while walking without looking ahead like a fool, causing him to fall to the ground. He was astonished when he looked up and saw a bright light unlike anything he had ever seen. Stranger still, when he looked inside the barrier, he saw a girl sleeping and floating in the air. His mind couldn't comprehend how the laws of physics could be disrupted like that. Dao began to examine the girl more closely, and his astonishment grew when he confirmed that she was just an ordinary human. In his shock, he spoke aloud, waking her up. The girl was happy to hear a human voice near her, but when she looked around, she found only a carrot in front of her. She ran towards him but couldn't cross the barrier, so she settled for talking to him and asked how a carrot could be so big and talk like humans. As she spoke, we discovered that this girl was one of the most powerful witches who was destined to destroy the planet, but Dao didn't know that. He saw only a sweet girl. Despite being just a weak, worthless carrot, the girl was very surprised that he could talk like humans, which made Dao feel happy and confident despite being just a small carrot. Dao began to think to himself, not understanding why there was a sleeping girl in the middle of the forest. What was even stranger was that, despite her extreme kindness in talking to him, he felt she was surrounded by a dark and powerful aura. Dao wondered why she was inside this strong barrier, assuming she might have been tricked by someone who was imprisoned inside the barrier and wanted to get out in exchange for someone else taking their place. Dao asked her about her identity and why she was trapped inside the barrier, but she couldn't remember and began to cry, saying her name was Raya, and she didn't remember anything else. She explained that she had been trapped for many years and didn't know how much time had passed, asking him to help her get out. During this, Dao began to see her true nature, but he didn't know she was a powerful witch. Raya said that if he helped her out of the barrier, she would do anything he asked. Dao snapped out of the visions he was having, feeling as if he had been dreaming while awake, but he couldn't understand what was happening. Raya told him it was normal because he got too close to the barrier and his spiritual energy was weak. However, Dao, being a scientist at heart, was determined to understand what was going on. He asked the system if it could break the barrier, The system replied that it didn't know yet, as it hadn't analyzed the barrier, and requested Dao to place his hands on it and use his knowledge skill. When he did so, after some analysis, the system explained to him that the barrier was strong and couldn't be broken unless his spiritual energy level was raised. Nevertheless, the system could create a temporary substitute for Raya. Dao was puzzled and asked what this substitute was and what its purpose would be. The system replied that the substitute could be used to get Raya out of the barrier, but it would consume spiritual energy drawn from Dao himself. Additionally, once the girl was out of the barrier, she would be his servant, meaning she would be able to do anything he asked, but couldn't disobey his orders. While Dao was deeply engaged in conversation with the system, Raya was puzzled and tried to check on him, asking why he was talking to the air. Dao told her not to worry about it and to focus on the important matter at hand. Once he informed her that she could be freed but would become his servant, she agreed immediately. Dao tried to tell her to think it over first, joking that he could be a pervert or something, but Raya responded that she didn't mind and was ready to follow all his commands, pointing out that even if he were a pervert, he was just a carrot in the end. Dao agreed to free her, but he told her to focus as he had some conditions. First, she must obey his orders literally because she currently has amnesia. Second, she would only be allowed out of the barrier for 1 hour a day, but he could extend this duration over time as his spiritual energy increased. Finally, he asked her to respect herself in front of others and not act strangely so people wouldn't misunderstand her. Upon her agreement, Dao asked the system to start the process immediately. The system, Xuan, began creating a strange doll resembling a robot, then initiated the exchange process to switch both the doll and Raya as quickly as possible. Within seconds, the doll entered the barrier, and Raya was expelled from it. The system informed Dao that he had only 1 hour from that moment. Raya was overjoyed to be out of the barrier after so many years. She tried to thank Dao but found him lying on the ground, about to die. The girl screamed in terror, not knowing what to do. Meanwhile, we see the impact of Raya's release from the barrier on the other people in the forest, who were extremely tense as they noticed the aura of a very powerful person near the witch's barrier. Back to Dao, whose condition was extremely poor, and no matter how much Raya called out to him, he didn't respond. She pulled his arm, telling him he was getting weaker. Dao replied that he would manage to overcome this crisis and was confident about it. He then asked the system how he could restore his vitality. The system replied that all he needed to do was plant himself in the ground. Dao was puzzled and remarked that this didn't make sense, as he couldn't recall any similar scientific method from his previous life. The system responded that the soil in this world contained spiritual energy, and by planting himself in the soil, he could absorb it, along with water, using the absorption skill. While Dao argued with the system, Raya was feeling scared for him, thinking he was starting to ramble and talk to himself. The system continued, explaining that if Dao wanted to speak in scientific terms, the spiritual energy he would obtain using the absorption skill could be converted into vital energy to restore him to his normal state. Dao replied that this still sounded illogical, but he would listen since he had no other solution. He called out to Raya and asked her to help plant him in the ground. Raya was surprised and asked if planting him would be enough to restore his vitality. When he explained about the spiritual energy, she was delighted and told him he wouldn't need to plant himself as she could provide him with spiritual energy. She had been charging her energy involuntarily in recent times, and even if she continued using it for 100 years, it wouldn't run out. Dao was overjoyed and thanked her for her offer, saying he was ready for the transfer. Dao was surprised to learn that this was the only method Raya knew for transferring spiritual energy. After the transfer, Dao felt significantly better and said he felt like a new person because the amount of energy he received was far greater than what he originally had. However, after the initial excitement, he began to remember that he was still just a moving carrot with no real purpose, which made him feel frustrated and say that regaining his vitality was pointless since he was ultimately just a vegetable. Amidst these actions, the system started laughing loudly, but when Dao approached it, the system quickly changed its tune and clarified that it wasn't laughing at him. Meanwhile, Raya, thinking Dao was still under the influence of madness and talking to himself, had her thoughts interrupted by Dao asking her to focus with him for a few seconds because he needed to plant himself as he was thirsty and wanted to drink. Raya agreed and told him she would make him the best and biggest hole. Indeed, we saw her charge her energy into her fist and direct it towards the ground in front of Dao. While Dao stood there, wishing he hadn't asked her for anything, her spell was so powerful, it caused a massive explosion in the middle of the forest, as if North Korea's leader had detonated his nuclear bomb. As dust and debris from the explosion spread, the other tribes in the forest began to notice. we see someone talking to their leader, terrified, saying that there was a loud noise coming from the direction of the secret forest, and all the demonic beasts and animals were fleeing in fear. The leader responded that he had indeed felt the disappearance of the strong aura that was in the secret forest, but hadn't realized that the entity that emerged would use its power so quickly. He immediately ordered his follower to inform the tribe to prepare to move, as the situation could become dangerous for them. Meanwhile, Raya was checking on Dao after he descended into the hole. It turned out that she had dug a massive trench-like pit, which made Dao remark that he would plant himself and never ask for her help again, as he was now afraid of her after what she had done. He felt that no sane person would dig such a huge hole just to plant a small carrot like him. While Dao was digging the spot to plant himself, he was thinking and saying that he feared freeing her after seeing the amount of destruction she could cause. After finishing planting himself, Dao called Raya and told her she could come down and wait with him if she wanted. Raya eagerly came down and asked if the absorption skill had worked already. He replied that she needed to let him focus, because if he failed to use it, he might turn her to ash. Within seconds, Dao shouted loudly, "Activate skill!" To his surprise, as soon as he finished saying this, his vitality returned to normal, and his energy was fully recharged within seconds, which amazed Raya even more. After regaining his strength, he grew larger and became even bigger than before. It turns out that Raya isn't just a witch, but belongs to the rabbit faction, as she seemed like she wanted to eat our hero. Dao then asked her to help him, as he didn't know how to get out of the ground. She responded that she had a lot of experience pulling carrots from the ground, and indeed, Raya successfully pulled him out within seconds. They began walking together away from the place they were in. On the way, Raya asked Dao about his current plans. He replied that his spiritual energy was very limited, so he needed to use it very carefully, or he would wither again. He then continued and gave her some information about the world they were in, saying that according to the system, there were demons in this world, and the source of the demons' power was only spiritual energy. Since there were demons in this world, there were certainly ordinary warriors, various sects, and experts in martial arts. As he finished his explanation, he said that he had to be very cautious because these monsters might attack him while Raya and the barrier were around, which would mean his immediate death. Raya reassured him, saying not to worry about this because she could give him large amounts of her spiritual energy to protect him. But Dao responded that he didn't want to rely on her or the system for everything, so he needed to try to increase his strength as quickly as possible. Although he died in his previous life because he had no plan to protect himself, he had learned his lesson and wouldn't let anyone kill him in this life. Then Dao stood on a high place and said that he would rely on scientific development for his survival and would strive to achieve the greatest success possible in the future. In his previous life, he used robots and artificial intelligence to work alongside humans to achieve the best and fastest production possible. Over time, he managed to improve the scientific development system he had invented, reaching the 5th level in it, with the first stages called the 5-day plan, even though it could take less time than that. He added that the things he would build and create in the coming period would make it so that he wouldn't need to exert much effort, thereby preserving his spiritual energy. Dao finished his explanation to Raya by asking if she knew of a safe place where he could live. He noticed that her mind seemed ready to explode from trying to comprehend his words. After calming down a bit, she admitted that she didn't understand a thing he said, but she would follow his orders to the letter and help him. Meanwhile, Dao was asking the system, Xuan, if it had any sort of commercial system. Xuan clarified that it didn't have anything like that. However, it explained to Dao that he could create anything from his memories, provided he had the necessary materials to craft what he wanted. To gather various resources into his storage, all he needed to do was touch and absorb them. But it was best to avoid absorbing any living creatures, as that was forbidden in their world, and doing so would put him on the path of demonic arts, attracting opposition from all practitioners of righteous arts. Dao's face filled with mischievous intent, as he remarked that he felt an inner urge to become an enemy of all righteous practitioners. But the system warned him of another issue. He would face a severe heavenly trial if he attempted to choose the demonic path, and in his current weak state, it would be impossible for him to survive this trial. However, it was noted in small print that he wouldn't face this trial if he became the leader. Dao became frustrated when the system quickly hid this information before he could see it. Nevertheless, he decided to put aside the system for now and focus on his plan for scientific development. He told Raya that he would need her help to execute the plan before her time outside the barrier ran out. The first thing he wanted her to do was to cut down some trees, as he intended to build a small hut in the area they were in. Raya began to use one of her spells, and it was clear that it was extremely powerful, to the point that Dao started yelling at her to wait. When she asked why, he explained that her last spell had destroyed the forest, so he asked her to use a slightly weaker spell. Raya shockingly replied that the digging spell was the weakest one she had, which led Dao to allow her to use her spell again. However, she ended up destroying the trees once more, despite his attempt to ask her to reduce the power. Meanwhile, we see a woman bathing and singing in the middle of the sea, seemingly unconcerned with what was happening around her. She was startled when she heard a loud explosion and looked to see what was going on. She noticed a massive explosion spreading to a place near her and remarked that it was a strange day full of disasters from the start. Dao stood there feeling deeply saddened as he realized they would destroy the forest if they continued this way. Not only that, but all the trees were burned, leaving not a single one intact. Raya tried to apologize, explaining that this was the least amount of spiritual energy she could use, but Dao told her not to worry anymore since they would use traditional methods to cut down the trees. He then explained that he wanted her to use only her hands to cut down the trees, and she was very happy when she heard his plan, confidently telling him that she was sure it would succeed. Indeed, Raya stood in front of a massive tree and announced that she wouldn't use any spiritual energy to avoid destroying it. She then had a new idea, deciding that instead of attacking the tree, she would uproot it entirely. This way, she was confident the tree would come out whole, rather than in destroyed pieces. To Dao's amazement, whose mind was about to explode, Raya asked if this tree was sufficient, or if he needed more. Dao replied that it was more than enough, and began touching the tree. The system explained that it would activate the disassembly and reassembly skill, but since he was currently not trying to build but only to disassemble, it would use the disassembly part of the skill temporarily. During this process, Dao started feeling faint again, much to Raya's alarm, as she didn't know that even the simplest operations consumed a large amount of his spiritual energy due to his extreme weakness. Fortunately, the disassembly process was completed within moments, and Dao received 100 pieces of wood in his inventory. As Dao collapsed to the ground from exhaustion and Raya ran towards him, the system told him to think about what he wanted to create, and the tool would form automatically. However, Dao couldn't make anything at that moment because he had no spiritual or vital energy left, so he had to plant himself again. Moments later, Dao returned to the hole Raya had made, frustrated by his extreme weakness and how quickly his spiritual energy depleted. He said he needed to accelerate his development process as much as possible because he disliked the current situation. But his thoughts were interrupted when Raya disappeared, as her allotted time outside the barrier had ended. The system informed him that he could use this feature again in 23 hours. Dao was disheartened because there were many things he wanted Raya to do before she returned to the barrier, and he felt he hadn't utilized the time they spent together efficiently during the past hour. Dao was then surprised by a strong light that started entering his body, which was, of course, Raya's spiritual energy. She had promised to give him a portion of her energy to protect him if someone attacked while she was asleep. After her energy entered his body, the system started speaking to him, explaining that it would analyze all the information about Raya through her spiritual energy. It told Dao that all he had to do was complete the absorption process and wait for the good news to come shortly. Indeed, the system began activating the deep scan and analysis technique. It worked on analyzing all aspects of Raya's attributes, but strangely, during the analysis, something went wrong, causing the system to use much more power. The system asserted that it wouldn't allow itself to fail in the face of any challenge. However, no matter how many times it tried, it kept failing in the examination process, even though Raya was asleep and not resisting the examination. After several long attempts, the scanning process finally succeeded, but the system realized that analyzing all of Raya's attributes would take approximately 950 hours. The system felt this would be extremely taxing and asked Dao if he wanted to continue the scanning process. Dao responded that he didn't want the system to be occupied for such a long time and preferred to resume the scanning when he had more free time. The system reassured him that he wouldn't come away empty-handed because the preliminary scan of Raya's power had yielded something beneficial. He could now use 1,000th of Raya's full strength. The energy burst that occurred at Dao's location had attracted the attention of some beasts, and a group of hyenas began running towards him. One of them said he was sure the explosion came from this direction. After a short run, they arrived at the deep pit, where Dao was inside, approaching it cautiously, as the creature that caused the pit must be very powerful. At that moment, a red-haired hyena remarked that he was sure something had happened in the secret forest area. When he looked ahead, he noticed that the witch's magical barrier had disappeared, and said the balance of power seemed to be about to change in the entire area. Then, a yellow-haired hyena intervened, saying they shouldn't leave without achieving something, and suggested they go down into the pit to look for any clues. Meanwhile, Dao was thrilled, feeling his power had increased significantly, so he asked the system how he could use his current strength. The system replied that it would explain the ways he could utilize his energy, but temporarily warned him that 3 beasts were approaching them. Dao started trembling with fear, thinking that if they were wild beasts, they would undoubtedly devour him. It turned out the hyenas were actually leopards, and they were still searching for clues in the deep pit. Dao was terrified, realizing they were the three beasts the system had warned him about. As they searched, the yellow-haired leopard told his red-haired companion to look ahead because something was planted in the ground. They immediately approached and started talking about Dao, but they couldn't understand why there was a carrot in this place. Dao was nearly paralyzed with fear, but he couldn't wet himself because he was just a carrot. The leopards were disappointed that there was nothing in the area except this carrot. The red-haired leopard suggested to his companions that they eat the carrot if they wanted, but they refused because they were powerful leopards and would never eat something that tasted bad. They said even dogs would refuse to eat carrots, even if they contained spiritual energy. Dao was extremely relieved and thought he was lucky to be just a useless carrot. While the system analyzed ways to use the portion of Raya's energy that Dao had acquired, the process was happening very quickly. Within moments, the analysis was complete, and Dao found himself emerging in a strange spiritual form resembling his original appearance when he was in his human body. Within seconds, Dao began to notice what was happening to him and was astonished, so he asked the system for an explanation. The system responded that these were the uses of Raya's energy that he had obtained and that he could move in his spiritual form as long as Raya was in a deep state of stasis. The system added that he needed to control his power well because if he used it recklessly, his spirit would become visible to everyone. Meanwhile, the red-haired leopard was losing hope of finding any clues in the area and started talking to his companions, suggesting they return and report to the leader what had happened. However, the black-haired leopard interrupted, saying he wanted to urinate before they left. Dao was overjoyed to be able to move in his human form, but was shocked when he heard the black-haired leopard say he felt sorry for the carrot and would urinate on it himself. At that moment, Dao was furious, willing to endure anything except someone urinating on him and making him even filthier. His intense anger caused his aura to leak out powerfully, making the leopards notice that the air had suddenly become cold. The black-haired leopard decided to hurry and urinate on Dao so they could leave the cold pit. Just then, a strange aura appeared in the sky above the leopards, and they noticed a bright light emanating from it. From this light, our hero emerged, causing the leopards to be stunned. They demanded to know who he was because his appearance was bizarre. Dao didn't respond with words. Instead, his spiritual body grew larger, and his normal aura transformed into something resembling flames due to his intense anger. In a loud voice, amid the leopard's astonishment, Dao told them that anyone who tried to urinate on him would be cut into 1,000,000 pieces. Of course, terror filled the leopards' faces at this moment because they were seeing a powerful spirit capable of speaking. The bigger problem was that Dao began using his spiritual energy to form a key ball, telling them that he would never forgive, even if they were humans instead of beasts, because anyone who urinates in the street deserves death regardless of their kind. He then shouted that he wouldn't kill them, but would cut off their genitals so they could never do it again. As he started advancing towards them, the leopards fled the scene, screaming for help. Meanwhile, Dao was pleased, thinking his plan had worked in scaring them away. He believed they would spread rumors about an evil spirit in the secret forest, which would keep enemies away and give him the chance to complete his 5-day plan. With pride, Dao declared that he was just a weak carrot at the moment, but he wouldn't need to exert much effort after completing his plan. After using his spiritual body, Dao felt a pain in his back as if he were an old man, and began to wonder if he would ever be able to return to his human body, or if he would remain a carrot for the rest of his life. The system responded, saying that while he might be a weak being, his maximum spiritual energy was unlimited, unlike other creatures. This meant that the more he used his absorption skill, the stronger he would become, and each time he depleted and recharged his energy, his strength would increase significantly more than before. After all this, our hero felt extremely tired and told the system that he was going to sleep and didn't want to be woken up unless there was a danger. As a new day dawned, Dao woke up startled, feeling someone sprinkling water on his face. Initially, he thought it was rain, but he was surprised to find Raya next to him, very excited, and pointing to a strange pit beside him. She explained that the giant pit she had created might be a blessing because small springs had started to form within it. Dao laughed and joked with her, knowing well that he had created the pit himself during his attack on the leopards. As usual, he found himself stuck and asked Raya to pull him out of the ground. Raya smiled fiercely, which made him feel discouraged, and she told him that she felt his appearance had changed and that he smelled better. Dao got angry with her and told her to stay away because he wouldn't allow her to eat him. He asked the system what was happening exactly, and the system replied that his spiritual energy had increased by a full level, and the more his spiritual energy increased, the better he tasted. Dao was very frustrated upon hearing this because he realized that the stronger he became, the more he would become a target for various beasts. However, He got excited afterward and said that he needed to make the most of the hour he spent with Raya to build the house as the first step in his scientific development plan. He called on the system and asked it to prepare the wood he had collected yesterday to start the building process. While he was talking to the system, Raya intervened and started thanking the system, which made Dao feel embarrassed, even though she couldn't see it. At that moment, Dao was thinking about how to build the house and was worried that his spiritual energy wouldn't be enough to build a large house, so he decided to abandon the idea of using the system to build the house for now. He asked Raya if she knew what houses looked like. Raya responded that she did and began the process of building the house with great enthusiasm. While Dao encouraged her to finish the house quickly, he was surprised after some time to find that the house Raya built was moving and looked unusual, not even resembling a typical mobile house. This made Dao more agitated than before, and he told her to focus well as he explained exactly what he meant by the word house. Indeed, our hero began showing her the design of the house he had drawn himself. It seemed he was an inventor, scientist, and engineer all at once. Then he started playing the role of a work supervisor, ordering her to move quickly because she was the worst trainee he had ever had in his entire life. Dao was surprised by Raya's sudden change and asked why. Initially, he thought she was upset with how he treated her, but she gave a shocking reply, saying she felt they were being watched and that the situation might be dangerous. Within seconds, Raya vanished from her spot and rushed towards the girl who had been observing them, the one who had seen the earlier explosion. Raya extended her claws and placed them on the girl's neck, demanding that she identify herself immediately or be killed. Strangely, Raya recognized the girl by her scent and said she was from the Iron Eaters Guild but didn't understand why she was watching them. The girl was terrified and didn't know what to say. She tried to evade the situation, explaining to Raya that she was just gathering herbs. Raya decided she wouldn't bother herself and would let Dao handle the girl. She grabbed the girl and flew at such high speed that it seemed they had vanished, and within seconds, they were back with Dao, who was standing there, frightened and confused by what was happening. Dao asked Raya if this was the girl who had been watching them. While Raya remained angry and silent, Dao analyzed the situation, saying he didn't feel that the girl intended to harm them. Puzzled by this feeling, he asked the system if it was an instinct he possessed. The system replied that it was a special skill of his, as it was a powerful system capable of detecting murderous intent in anyone near them. At that moment, Raya began to lose her patience, tightening her grip on the girl and threatening to break her arm if she didn't explain why she was watching them. The girl, in extreme pain because Raya was twisting her arm, insisted that she wasn't watching them and was willing to swear to it. The girl's apparent distress began to elicit some pity from Dao, who told Raya to release her so she wouldn't dislocate her arm. Naturally, because Raya was bound by her agreement with Dao, she let the girl go without further questions. Dao began talking to the girl, explaining that they treated people who told the truth well, so he wanted to know why she was hiding if she wasn't really watching them. The girl explained that she had been hearing explosions in the forest for several days, and other tribes were spreading rumors about the presence of powerful monsters. That's why she was exploring the forest to find out what was going on. Dao was surprised and thought to himself that if there were rumors, they must be about the leopards. However, he couldn't understand why a young girl like her would come alone to the forest to investigate the powerful entity that even made the leopards flee. Raya interrupted his thoughts by asking the girl what rumors she was talking about. When the girl hesitated, Raya began to get agitated again, telling her to answer quickly, or she wouldn't treat her kindly any longer. As Raya's angry expression grew, Dao was terrified, thinking to himself that he couldn't believe the drastic change in Raya's personality. He began to tremble, hoping she wasn't becoming too savage, because if she were, she could destroy the world. Dao calmed down a bit and said that he had scanned her using his system and found no murderous intent, explaining that she was acting out of fear. But his perspective changed moments later when he looked at Raya again and yelled loudly, saying that he had unleashed the Demon King into the human world and that the whole world would be destroyed because of his mistake. At this point, the girl finally decided to speak up and confess everything. She told them that the rumors said a royal warrior had appeared in this place. Dao was the only one who understood what she meant and who exactly she was talking about, but he didn't understand how they could consider him a warrior while he was in his spiritual form. The girl continued, saying that her tribe had come to this place together to meet the royal warrior and receive his blessing so they could remain safe for life. After hearing this, Dao began to wonder because she mentioned her tribe, but everything became clear when he looked into the distance and saw the tribe members she was referring to. However, he was shocked and couldn't understand her connection to them because these tribe members, my friend, were actually pandas, and it was impossible for them to be from the same human tribe as her. At that moment, Raya intervened and asked Dao to calm down a bit. She explained that these were the Iron Eaters clan, and she thought they were a clan of evil royal beasts. Dao was puzzled and asked her how pandas could be evil and royal beasts when they were just weak pandas. Raya responded that pandas grow old and become much larger than they are now, which is why the kings of the Chai Mountain clan used them as mounts. Raya grabbed the girl and told her there was no royal warrior here. The girl replied in astonishment, saying she was sure of her information because anyone who could defeat 3 leopards alone must be very important. As Raya was about to get agitated again, Dao intervened and told her to treat the girl kindly because she was just an ordinary human and not a beast. Dao took over the conversation and told the girl to take her tribe and leave, as there was no royal warrior or anything of the sort here. While he was talking, the girl noticed a large pit and said this was the pit the leopards had mentioned, where they said a carrot was planted. When she finished speaking, she noticed Dao standing beside her and screamed loudly, saying she couldn't believe there was a talking carrot. Even though Dao thought to himself that she seemed naive, her facial expression quickly changed to one of intense admiration. She then prostrated herself on the ground and showed her respect to Dao, who stood there shocked and unable to understand why she was treating him this way. The girl began to explain that the ancient legends of their tribe foretold that their original ruler and savior was a talking carrot. This meant that, after searching for many years, they had finally found him. She said that from now on, they would restore their tribe's former glory. As the girl continued her story, the members of the panda tribe began to prostrate themselves on the ground out of respect for Dao. Dao tried to ask them to stop treating him this way, explaining that he had no money to give them and nothing to help them with. But he was literally talking to himself. Suddenly, the girl picked him up and hugged him tightly, saying she was confident he wouldn't delay in coming to save them. When the other pandas saw this, they quickly joined in, hugging Dao with great affection, nearly crushing him with their overwhelming love. At that moment, Raya panicked and said she had to act quickly because Dao was about to suffocate and die in front of her. However, instead of helping, she made things worse by trying to pull him forcefully from the girl named Wen. Dao screamed loudly in pain, but no one paid attention as they were busy arguing with each other. Each of them claimed that Dao belonged to them and refused to share him with anyone else. Dao continued to scream in agony, on the verge of being torn in half, with each side ready to claim a piece of him. At that moment, Dao let out a powerful shout and ordered them to sit down and listen to him because he couldn't take it anymore. He said he was just an ordinary carrot, and now, thanks to them, he looked strange due to all the pulling and tugging. Dao began talking to Wen and told her he had some questions to verify if he was indeed their tribe's protector. Wen confidently replied that she wasn't mistaken at all, and any member of her tribe, even her ancestors, would say the same. Dao decided to reassess the situation, thinking that Wen wasn't weak, but rather naive, and willing to serve him and her entire tribe for no reason. Dao thought of exploiting this situation, seeing them as free labor that wouldn't cost him anything. He realized that Raya wouldn't be useful in building or gathering resources due to her immense strength, and he considered relocating from this place because of the spreading rumors and the need to find a better location with more resources. Dao snapped out of his thoughts and called out to the girl, who he learned was named Wen after some time. He asked her about the location of her tribe and the number of members. Wen answered that they lived on the edge of the secret forest and that their tribe consisted of 108 full-grown pandas. Before Dao could agree or refuse, Wen approached him, making him feel pressured and annoyed as she tried to push him into agreeing to be their leader. When Raya saw this, she approached Dao and explained to Wen that she shouldn't push things too far. When Wen didn't respond, Raya got closer and began using a fire spell, threatening to roast Wen and her tribe if she didn't leave Dao alone. Raya gave her 2 options, either to stay away from Dao entirely or allow her to approach him freely, but only as a servant to Raya. Wen began addressing Raya as Queen in front of Dao, who thought to himself how lucky he was that Raya was on his side. Otherwise, he would have ended up as a roasted carrot. Dao then spoke with Wen and asked if her tribe would listen to his orders. Wen assured him that they were completely loyal to him and would do anything for him, even if it meant dying for his sake. Dao was delighted, realizing he had not only gained a free camp, but also workers who would do anything he wanted. Dao then asked Wen to take the savior to the camp, since she knew the way. Wen was thrilled and told him she had been waiting for this moment for a long time, assuring him that all he had to do was follow her. After a while of walking, Wen told them they had finally arrived at the bamboo forest in the Shimfengji area, and that the distance between the camp and the pit was only half an hour, making it easy to go there any time. Dao looked around and said the place was much more beautiful than he expected, feeling like the pandas lived in a paradise on Earth, which made him a bit nervous. He feared they might be a bunch of lazy bears, as that would mean he couldn't benefit from them in any work. At that moment, Raya intervened, expressing disbelief that the tribe had fallen to this level. She recalled knowing something about the tribe in the past, but couldn't remember the rest, standing there in shock. Dao stepped in and told her not to pressure herself, thinking to himself that any memories she had might be filled with disasters. Meanwhile, Wen was very excited to be back at the camp, calling out to her grandmother, saying she had found the tribe's protector. When Dao looked at the grandmother, he felt awkward and said he didn't know how to address her exactly, as he was now their protector and considered their leader, but he definitely couldn't speak rudely to the elderly. He initially thought of calling her grandmother, but everything changed when he saw her face, which looked younger than Wen's. Dao started thinking that all his worries were unnecessary and that he would deal with her the same way he dealt with Wen. Wen then pointed to Dao and told her grandmother to look quickly at the talking carrot. With complete calmness, Dao spoke to her to prove he wasn't just an ordinary carrot. When this happened, Yao began to cry, saying that her dream had finally come true and that she never expected to meet the tribe's protector before she died. Then her facial expression changed to one of intense anger as she called for all the elders of the sect to come and pay their respects to Lord Carrot. They all got up, woke the rest of the pandas who were sleeping, and ran quickly to see what carrot she was talking about. But when they understood the situation, they too prostrated themselves on the ground and paid homage to our hero. Dao said he felt a very strange sensation, and the strangest part was that it felt even better than winning a Nobel Prize. These people respected him greatly and would obey his commands, and finally, he would be able to implement the 5-day plan, which was part of the scientific development process. His thoughts were interrupted by Yao's enthusiastic voice, asking him to help them because their tribe was in great danger. Dao was puzzled and tried to understand what she was talking about. Yao explained that their tribe was protected by the presence of a great entity that resided in the neighboring secret forest. This entity was trapped inside a barrier, and its aura scared away enemies, preventing them from approaching. Dao was astonished by her mention of the forest protector. Yao continued, saying that many tribes had started appearing in the secret forest, making the situation dangerous for them. With a simple analysis, Dao realized they were referring to Raya, who was standing there clueless about what was happening. Dao thought to himself that they didn't know the protector inside the barrier was actually Raya, as they were too afraid to approach the secret forest because of her aura. His thoughts were interrupted by Raya's cheerful voice, saying that the place was very enjoyable and that they could finally relax and live a peaceful life. Dao got down from her hands and went to Yao, wanting to know the rest of the story, and asked her to explain exactly what was happening. Yao replied that the leopard clan lived in the Senlu forest and had long been trying to take over their bamboo forests. Although they couldn't attack initially because of the barrier, they had found a group of leopards near their camp a few days ago. Wen began to cry and told Dao that they couldn't leave the secret forest because the leopard clan constantly bullied them and attacked any panda they saw. Even when they found panda children gathering herbs or twigs, they would harass them for fun. Due to the relentless bullying, the panda tribe had to retreat to the bamboo forests, even though they originally owned more than a third of the Senlu forest. But now, being on the edge of the secret forest, if they were forced to leave the bamboo forest, they would have nowhere to live. Yao spoke of how their tribe was once very strong, but all that had changed, and they had become just a group of weakened bears. As Dao thought more about the situation, he realized it might be related to Raya. He said it made sense, since Raya had lived for hundreds of years, and even treated the pandas with great kindness, indicating she liked them. However, he was shocked when Raya said she loved them and wanted to eat them, adding that she had many recipes for cooking panda. After Dao explained to her that she couldn't eat them, he asked if she could drive away the leopard clan if they tried to attack their camp. Raya gave a sly smile and told him to choose his words carefully, pointing out the significant difference between driving them away and exterminating them completely. Dao looked at her and said that he had no intention of getting rid of them, but simply wanted to drive them away without her taking any drastic actions on her own. Raya agreed to his terms, and Dao then turned to the rest of the pandas, telling them not to be afraid anymore because the mighty protector had decided to defend them from now on, and he wouldn't let anyone approach the bamboo forests, no matter how powerful they were. With every word Dao spoke, Wen and her grandmother's joy increased. Since what was happening was like a dream come true for them, Dao seized the opportunity and told them they must arm themselves and be well prepared to face their enemies. He added that starting tomorrow, he would begin developing a defense system in the bamboo forests, combining ancient methods with modern scientific advancements he possessed. Meanwhile, we see the leader of the leopards riding on the back of the red-haired leopard. The leader wanted to see the pit himself, having heard from his followers that there was a very powerful spirit inside it, possibly belonging to a royal warrior. He stood in his place, contemplating what his follower had told him about the pit containing an extremely powerful entity. He was confident that his follower wasn't lying, as anyone who could create such a pit must possess great strength. At the end of his thoughts, the leader leaped into the pit with great enthusiasm, while the other leopards stood shocked, calling out to him. Their expressions changed from fear to admiration within seconds, saying they had expected nothing less from their bold leader. The leader, however, was stunned when he saw a small spring at the bottom of the pit, something none of his followers had mentioned before. Additionally, he saw a strange-looking house with arms and legs like a human, which made him feel both fear and anger. He ordered his followers to send someone to monitor the area continuously, as he wanted to know the latest developments there. The appearance of the house and spring could mean better things might appear in the pit over time, and they could benefit from them. At the same time, Dao was enjoying the hot spring while the system told him it was analyzing the water. Dao began to recall his previous life, where all his time was consumed by work, leaving no time to enjoy or do anything else. He said that even if he went back to his old life, he would live the same way, only working. But things were different now because he was just a carrot and not a scientist. Dao relaxed even more after Raya calmed down and returned to her usual self after getting into the spring. Then Wen arrived and told Dao she would give him a massage. Her words seemed to anger Raya, who was about to kill her, so Wen tried to defuse the situation by asking Raya if she wanted a massage as well. Raya surprisingly calmed down, and Wen remarked that she must have enjoyed staying in the spring and didn't want to leave. As time passed, the pandas and our heroes all fell asleep. With Raya now asleep inside her barrier, Dao seized the opportunity to use his spirit summoning technique. It is worth mentioning that Raya can now stay outside the barrier for longer periods thanks to the increase in Dao's spiritual energy. Additionally, the barrier itself has been transferred into Dao's body, which is why it disappeared from the secret forest. Dao remarked that life here was very enjoyable, and he hadn't expected anyone in this world to know how to give a massage. He started analyzing the camp around him and noted that the place only had some dilapidated houses, a hot spring, and a few fields. The biggest issue was that the pandas didn't possess any skills or abilities other than their ability to transform between human and panda forms. This meant that anything Dao would need to do in the future would require him to teach the pandas himself, since they were inept at everything. But Dao said he didn't mind starting from scratch with them, especially knowing that their ancestors were royal beasts, and there was a chance he could restore their lost power. Dao then focused and said he needed to be cautious because he was now in a stable position and had to protect himself if any problems arose. At that moment, he encountered Wen, who was wandering in the forest at night, and he was shocked. While he was thinking to himself that he didn't want anyone to see him in this form, Wen was also stunned and couldn't understand who the person in front of her was. However, she began to recognize his aura as familiar and said it was the same aura as the Carrot King, or Dao. Still, she couldn't comprehend how a human spirit could reside within a carrot. Dao noticed her expressions and realized he wouldn't be able to get out of this situation easily. But then he thought to himself that his ability to manifest in a spiritual form shouldn't be a secret, and it was natural for everyone to know. So he broke his silence and introduced himself to Wen, saying his name was Dao, and that he was actually the original spirit of the carrot and its primary controller. He pointed to the carrot he was talking about and told her that he awakens in this form when he sleeps. Dao tried to explain the situation further to Wen, whose mind was about to explode from what she had seen. After his explanation, her eyes began to sparkle, and she told him she couldn't believe he managed to attain a human form after thousands of years. Dao felt embarrassed because she was praising him, but he told her he wanted to walk with her for a bit, as he had some questions for her. As they walked together, Dao asked her if there was anything in their world they could use for lighting instead of fire. Wen replied that there were indeed lamps, but only nobles and the wealthy used them. The metal used in the lighting process was made from fluorite stone, as this stone could withstand a large amount of spiritual energy, allowing it to stay lit for half a month each time it was charged. But her facial expressions began to change, and she told him that there was a price they had to pay for these lamps. Dao was puzzled and asked her about the price she was talking about and why they had to pay it if only the nobles used the lamps. Wen replied that modern factories had invented other stones, and these stones were charged using the spiritual energy of demonic beasts. Because of this, demons were being kidnapped from the forest and sold as slaves, used by humans to charge these stones repeatedly until they died, and then replaced by other slaves as if they were batteries. Unfortunately, among these demons, many pandas had been kidnapped from their tribe. As Wen recounted what was happening, she began to break down and scream loudly, saying she didn't understand why they were being treated this way when they were just trying to live in peace. Dao patted her head and told her not to be sad because he would change all that and replace the primitive world they lived in with an advanced one where no one needed to enslave another to obtain spiritual energy. Dao and Wen continued their way, with Dao looking for a nearby water source. After a bit of walking, they reached the river. Dao told Wen that theft existed at all times and places in the world, especially the theft of important resources like fuel. Unfortunately, since the most important resource in their world was spiritual energy, that's why powerful nations tried to control it. However, he promised Wen that he would change all that in the coming period, making everyone rely on renewable resources like water as an energy source, benefiting from many other abundantly available resources to reduce conflicts and allow humans and demons to live in peace. Dao started conducting various calculations, such as the depth of the water and the height from which it fell, noting it was just a branch off a waterfall. Using his system for the calculations, Wen was puzzled and asked if he was talking to her or himself. Dao ignored her and focused on the system, which completed its calculations and informed him that if he built water turbines, they would operate at 70% efficiency. Turbines simply convert the energy generated from water movement into electricity. While Dao mentioned that he could generate about 21 kilowatts of electricity every second, Wen was confused because she didn't understand anything he was saying. Dao responded simply that it was about choosing a new, cheaper energy source than spiritual energy, which would make all companies start relying on this source instead of enslaving demons. Wen was thrilled and motivated, telling him she would help him with anything as long as he was trying to eradicate slavery. Dao told her that the secret forest they were in was actually a magical forest, containing many treasures that, if utilized correctly, could develop the entire world. However, he clarified that not everyone could see these amazing things. Only a scientist like him could. Dao put on his glasses and told Wen that he would need her and the panda's help as much as possible in the coming period. Although Wen thought that science was the name of a person, she promised him that she and the pandas would assist him. Dao then explained that his plan for scientific development would start with developing energy generation systems. The next morning, our hero returned to his carrot body and began addressing the pandas as their protector. Although he spoke passionately about the importance of light, they applauded him with enthusiasm, which encouraged him to continue his inspiring speech, telling them that to emerge from the darkness, they would need to work hard to overcome their weaknesses. Dao started by dividing the pandas into small teams. The first team would extract large quantities of magnetite stones. The second team would search for iron, as he would need large amounts of it as well. The third team would collect stones, sand, coal, and other materials. Yao was puzzled when she saw that he was assigning tasks to everyone except her, so she asked him what her role would be. Before replying, Dao decided to take a look at her background and found that she was skilled in crafts and manual labor. Therefore, he told her that her role would come later, as he would need her expertise greatly after completing the water turbines. As for Wen, Dao noticed that she wasn't skilled in anything except massages, so he decided she would work for him providing massages whenever he wanted, despite him being a carrot. Wen felt extremely disappointed. At this moment, Raya intervened and asked our hero if he wanted her to kill someone or exterminate any tribe. Dao felt a deep fear inside, worried about the possibility of her regaining her memory. However, he tried to remain calm on the outside and told her to let him handle everything. Raya replied that ever since she left the barrier, she felt she was not useful to him and that her life had no meaning. Dao told her that she was wrong because she was actually a cornerstone in his plan. But Raya misunderstood him completely and asked if he meant she was just a stone that should stay in one place. She began to show signs of sadness, telling him that ever since he made new friends, he no longer cared about her. Dao decided to give her something to do because he was afraid of her, so he told her to watch over the bamboo forests, and if she saw anyone trying to attack, to inform him immediately. Raya responded that simply reporting wouldn't be effective, and she preferred to bring the intruders to him if she saw any, because she couldn't stay out of the barrier for more than an hour and a quarter. Therefore, if he really wanted her to report any enemies appearing near them, he would need to extend her time outside the barrier so she could spend more time with him besides her work. At that moment, the system emerged and informed Dao that if he truly wanted to increase the duration of Raya's time outside the barrier, he would need to deplete his spiritual energy reserves. Each time he withered and recharged his energy, his reserves would increase. Dao began to comfort Raya, telling her that from now on he would spend more time with her. He assured her that he would soon increase his spiritual energy, allowing her to live comfortably outside the barrier where she was confined. Time passed, and our hero woke up to the sound of the pandas frantically waking him up, telling him they had finished the excavation and extraction of the minerals. At first, he thought they had gathered a huge amount of minerals. But despite the pandas being exhausted and happy with his astonishment, that changed when he fully woke up and realized the quantity they had collected was very small. He was on the verge of tears. Dao began to imagine the pandas from his memories of Raya, who described them as very strong and fierce creatures, making him extremely angry as he wondered how these weak creatures could be descended from the legendary royal panda beasts. However, he calmed himself down, saying the mistake was in raising his expectations too high, realizing they were more like cats than bears, and he needed to treat them accordingly. He decided to get stern with them and told them they would start training from tomorrow, as the amount of elements they collected was too little. While feeling disappointed, he asked the system, Xuan, if it could make a small turbine to generate power with the simple materials available. When the system responded positively, he was overjoyed and said it would be enough to power a small lamp, thus conserving some spiritual energy for later use. The system warned him to be cautious as producing industrial materials would consume a large amount of his spiritual energy. but Dao told the system not to worry and asked it to start the work immediately. He then approached Wen and asked her to dig a hole in the ground quickly because he decided to plant himself in it to provide the system with continuous spiritual energy to keep the work going. Within seconds, the system began absorbing all the elements using Dao's absorption skill. Wen was amazed by the bright light, as she couldn't see the system and thought Dao was performing some sort of magic. Moments later, Dao began to wither in front of Wen, who was terrified and rushed to plant him as he had instructed earlier. She feared he might die, knowing the leopards would make an example of her and her tribe if anything happened to him. As soon as Wen planted Dao, he began using the absorption skill to increase his spiritual energy, allowing the system to complete the basic operations to build the turbines. Dao told everyone to prepare well for the main construction. After some time, the system finished the process, and Dao's spiritual energy level rose to level 2. The system told Dao that not only had his spiritual energy increased, but it was also fully recharged, as his energy would regenerate automatically with each level increase. The system also reminded him that his taste had become sweeter, which annoyed Dao, who told the system not to mention it now. Their conversation was interrupted by Wen, who said that he smelled wonderful, and if he wasn't their tribe's protector, she would have eaten him by now. But Dao wasn't focused on that at the moment, as he was asking the system to show him his statistics window. When he examined the window, he noticed that his current offensive power was 0, but if he used Raya's spiritual energy and strength, he could execute very powerful attacks. He realized that he had no value without Raya, but there was a contract between them, and she wouldn't disobey his orders. Moreover, he was still at the beginning of his scientific development plan, and he was confident it would provide enough power to fend off any enemy once completed. However, that wasn't enough for Dao, so he decided that once he finished his current work, he would ask the system how to increase his strength. He understood that the presence of a spiritual energy slot in the statistics window meant it could be increased, but he didn't yet know how. Once he finished pondering this, he decided to focus on the turbine for now. He spoke to Wen and asked her to gather the pandas and come with him to the river. They arrived there, and the pandas were carrying the lamp, saying they must take good care of it because it was a royal tool. The system explained to Dao that all he had to do was throw the turbine into the water, and it would work on its own because it was fully equipped. Dao gave the turbine to the pandas and asked them to do so, and they were extremely excited, considering it a great honor. As soon as they threw the turbine into the water, one of them stood beside Dao and told him everything was ready. Dao responded by asking everyone to focus on him because he was about to show them a miracle they had never seen before. In front of everyone, Dao pulled the lamp's activation lever, making exaggerated movements as he did so. In 1 second, the lamp began to light up in front of everyone, leaving them stunned because they had never seen such a large lamp before. The amazing thing was that the lamp worked without the need for spiritual energy, and above all, Dao wasn't using fire for lighting, which made them bow before him again to offer their sincere respects. Although Dao appeared astonished on the outside, he was thoroughly enjoying every moment of the adoration he received. Meanwhile, the 3 leopards were watching from a distance, their faces filled with terror. The red-haired one told his friends that he was sure this was the same carrot they had seen in the pit, and he was scared because he knew this carrot was the leader of the pandas they used to bully. As he finished speaking, they all realized something important. Dao's presence with the pandas meant the giant pit was empty and unprotected. The red-haired leopard said they must return to their clan's headquarters immediately to report this significant discovery to their leader. The leopards returned to their clan and transformed into their human forms, deciding to go to the leader at once. They entered his tent and told him they had an urgent report, explaining that they had found the carrot in the bamboo forests, and it was the same carrot that had been in the pit. While the red-haired one spoke, he began to stammer, which angered the leader, who demanded he speak quickly without any suspense. The red-haired leopard, frightened, told him that the carrot they had seen was the same royal spirit that could have killed them all days ago. The leader became agitated and asked if he was sure of his words, because if he found out he was lying, he would punish him severely. The other 2 leopards intervened and confirmed that they had seen it with their own eyes, and that Dao was operating a lamp without the need for fire or spiritual energy. The leader's astonishment grew to the point where he was almost fainting because he couldn't fathom how a lamp could light up without a power source. But his expressions quickly changed, and he began to get excited, saying that this carrot was definitely the legendary protector of the pandas. His eyes sparkled, and he asked his followers if they remembered what the legend said exactly. Their eyes lit up, and they confirmed that they did. Immediately, they all arrived at Dao's location, bowed before him, and in unison declared their complete allegiance to him, hoping he would accept them as followers and become their protector too. Although Dao was shocked by what was happening, the pandas were even more astonished because they didn't want to ally with their enemies. Before Dao could respond, the leopards grew more enthusiastic, praising Dao intensely so he wouldn't reject their offer to join him. The leader knew well that if Dao allied only with the pandas, the leopards would soon be driven out of the forest or exterminated by him. Seeing the leopards bowing beside them, Dao was conflicted because he wanted to unite the leopards under his rule and use them as workers too, but he was afraid they might harm the pandas or deceive him. His thoughts clashed in his mind, as he considered that having over 100 leopards would make implementing his scientific development plan easier. But Wen interrupted his thoughts by speaking to the leopard leader, telling him that Mr. Carrot was their tribe's protector, and she didn't understand why he was there in the first place, demanding that he leave immediately. She then shouted loudly, saying she refused to allow the leopards to join them. The leader replied that he had seen the element collection tasks Dao had assigned them, and pointed out that she shouldn't speak after the small quantity they had gathered after a whole day of work. He added that the panda tribe would need to work for weeks to collect the same amount of elements the leopard tribe could gather in one day. At that moment, Wen passionately responded, saying she was confident they would gather more resources over time. The leader coldly replied that they could do that, but it would take about 100 years of training, maybe more. Just as Wen was about to explode in anger and lash out at him, Dao's voice interrupted, telling her and the leopard leader to stop talking. The strange thing was that the system's scan of the leopards had been completed, and Dao realized they genuinely wanted to join him because there was no intent to kill from their side. This was, of course, unusual, since the leopard tribe had been bullying the pandas for hundreds of years. What had changed now to make them willing to follow under Dao's rule? To understand the sudden change, Dao began speaking directly to the leopard leader, explaining that he would ask some questions before accepting them as followers. As soon as the leader said he could ask whatever he wanted, Dao's face turned serious, and he asked why his tribe had been bullying the panda tribe all this time. The leader was taken aback and began sweating profusely, trying to quickly think of a response. When he looked at his followers for help, they all showed signs of refusal and didn't assist him with a single word. This made the leader stammer while attempting to answer Dao. Seeing this, Dao grew agitated and told him to think carefully before speaking, warning him that if he lied, he would never accept them as followers. The leader's embarrassment grew as he looked away and said in a low voice that they bullied the pandas because they were very kind. Dao didn't hear him clearly and asked him to speak up. The leader then said louder that the pandas were very kind creatures and that the leopards saw these fluffy beings as their weakness. This statement was shocking to Dao, who stood there stunned, trying to comprehend what was happening, while the pandas were in complete silence. The leader didn't stop there and continued, saying that they weren't actually bullying the pandas, but pretending to do so to get a chance to touch them. Amid Dao's attempt to grasp the situation, he asked the leader why they occupied the pandas' territory. The leader replied that, as he mentioned before, they loved the fluffy creatures and couldn't resist the urge to touch them when they found beings made of fur. When the pandas started fearing them and hiding, they occupied the bamboo forest to be able to play with them anytime they wanted. While the leader chuckled intermittently, Dao thought to himself that the leopards were incredibly trivial and never expected that they liked fur as much as humans. Using the system to verify the truthfulness of the leopard's words, Dao realized they were telling the truth and that there was no deceit in their statements. Despite this, since the pandas were the ones being bullied, Dao wanted their opinion on accepting the leopard's alliance. Wen replied that they didn't have a specific opinion and would comply with any decision he made, no matter how difficult it was for them, because they knew they couldn't help him gather elements and that if he relied on them, it would take months to implement his plan. Amid Wen and the panda's frustration, Dao began speaking to her, and she was happy when he said that everything would improve from now on, because he would personally oversee their training and wouldn't allow them to slack off as long as he was alive. Dao looked at the leopards and told them he had decided to accept their alliance, and from now on, there would be a coalition between their tribe and the panda tribe. The red-haired leopard stepped forward and asked Dao to choose a good name for the alliance. Dao thought for a moment, trying to find a name that combined leopard and panda, but he gave up and asked the system, Xuan, to help him choose a suitable and intimidating name for the alliance. While Dao was talking to Xuan, the members of both tribes thought he had gone mad. The system suggested the name Lupao Gang, explaining that the word carried many meanings, but Dao wasn't impressed with the name and replied that he wanted a simple and fitting name. After a bit of thinking, his expression changed to seriousness, and he said they would be known as the Supreme Carrot Union from now on. Of course, everyone was excited and began cheering loudly for Dao, even though the name was strange. They supported him without a doubt. The next day, Dao woke up to a big surprise regarding the elements collected by the leopards. Before going to sleep, he had asked them to participate in the collection process, but he did not expect them to gather such a large quantity. The elements they collected were massive, resembling skyscrapers. As Dao stood in front of them, analyzing the situation, the leopard leader interrupted his thoughts and told him that this quantity was just the beginning and that they would collect even more the next day. Dao was overjoyed, his face lighting up with a smile as he realized he had made the right decision to include them in the alliance. Their inclusion had significantly eased the process of gathering elements, and the leopards were training the pandas daily to increase their strength as quickly as possible. Dao then sat with Raya, lost in thought about how to use all these elements at once to make the turbines, considering the withering problem he faced. Raya surprised him by saying he shouldn't worry, as she would help by providing him with spiritual energy and water continuously, so he wouldn't wither. The system Xuan intervened and confirmed that Raya was serious, and if she helped him, he would be able to build the turbines he needed in a short period. Encouraged by this, Dao told them he could start immediately, as he didn't want to stay inside the soil for long and feel suffocated. Moments after starting the process of building the energy generator, Dao was about to wither, terrifying his followers, who were on the verge of panic. But Raya quickly intervened, supplying him with her spiritual energy and directly making him absorb water using one of her spells, repeating the process 10 times. Each time, Dao withered more than the previous time, until suddenly the system informed him that the building process was completely finished, and he could now extract the constructed items from the system's storage. To extract these items, all he had to do was think about the item he wanted to extract, and it would come out on its own without any additional effort. Dao did just that, starting by summoning the turbine from storage, then the generator, and finally, he summoned the new lamp that the system had decorated with a statue on top. However, Dao was annoyed that the system had consumed extra spiritual energy to decorate the lamp. Dao then addressed his followers, telling them to transport the turbine to the river and handle it carefully. Within moments, they had transported it to the river and placed it in a suitable spot, with all members of the Alliance eagerly waiting to see what would happen, still considering Dao a master magician. The system appeared to Dao and informed him that everything was ready. At that moment, Dao gave the signal to Wen, who held the activation key. Wen pressed the key, and the turbine blades began to spin, converting the water flow into electricity and transferring it to the generator, which was connected directly to the lamp. Consequently, the lamp began to illuminate before everyone's eyes within a few seconds. Dao's face filled with joy, as he said he couldn't believe he had finally achieved his first goal. He then entered his room and began writing in his journal, noting that on this day, electricity was introduced to the bamboo forest. He reflected that all he needed to do now was to focus on creating the rest of the essential electrical tools, planning to gradually expand from this point forward until he could complete the scientific development plan he aimed for, ultimately leading to widespread electricity generation.